Excellencies, dear guests, welcome to Ukraine House. So it's my honor to open second day of our Innovation Days. It's our second year we're hosting this beautiful event as a side event of annual Spring IMF and World Bank Group annual meetings. And today we continue. We'll have 4 panel discussions. We'll have exceptional leaders, panelists, moderators, and extraordinary guests, of course, with us. So please grab a cup of coffee or tea or water, and we're about to start our first panel discussion. Please, between our panel discussions, we'll have coffee breaks. Ukraine House is open. We have a lot of nice exhibition inside, so please, you're more than welcome to explore. And we're about to start. I'll pass the floor to the moderator, and you'll start the first panel discussion. So I'm passing this mic to Vladyslav Rashkovan, alternate executive director, IMF. And thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Ruslan. Let me introduce our speakers today. Governor Pyshnyy, Davide La Cecilia, the Italy Special Envoy, head of also Ukraine Recovery Conference, which will be in Rome, Pierre Heilbronn, the French Special Envoy for Ukraine Relief and Reconstruction, and Saum, Regional Country Director for Eastern Europe from World Bank. Sergii Marchenko is here. He will just join us in a few minutes after that. So, yeah. While yesterday we were here in the opening session for the conference. I think it was Oksana Markarova who said that no one, like Ukrainians, want to have a peace. Unfortunately, while we were yesterday on the panel, the Russia, started a massive attack on Kyiv, one of the biggest attacks, and several people died, and there are a lot of also destructions. So today, discussion also about the reconstruction, and this panel about reconstruction, how to find the funds for reconstruction, where they may come, and how much we may need. We know more or less from World Bank, but still, my first question will be, to all the panelists, just to start the discussion today, is we have a lot of competing priorities. Not only military expenditures, not only social expenditures, not only rebuilding, infrastructure, housing, demining for sure. There are many economic topics like building reserves of the central bank for the future. So the question is still how to prioritize those needs. Since you speak about reconstruction, let's maybe for 1 second to put aside the military expenditures. So my question will be to each panelist, and maybe we can start with Bob, who the World Bank, who was doing the analysis. So let's imagine that you have. I wanted to say about like $100 billion, but let's do maybe $1 billion. It might be difficult. The $100 billion, it's very easy to spend, at least in your minds. But if you have $1 billion in your hands, how would you prioritize those spendings in Ukraine? And since we also have a topic on innovation, how would you prioritize those spendings and those investments in order to make most impact to help Ukraine, and also to leapfrog, as we discussed. Bob, if we can do it like 2 minutes each, it would be really great.
Great, very good, very good. Thank you. It's great to be here today, and it's always nice to be at Ukraine House. As someone who lives in Kyiv, when I'm here at Ukraine House, it feels like I am back home in Kyiv, and I do appreciate the hosting that Ukrainian authorities do for us here, and the valuable inputs that they provide for all of us. How to spend, whether it's $1 billion or $100 billion, or maybe somewhere in the middle there. Our rapid damage and needs assessment, the 4th one that was just released, that we do with the European Union, with the United Nations, and obviously with the government of Ukraine, talked about $524 billion of needs over the next 10 years. Based on $172 billion of damage. So clearly there's a lot of priorities in there. But if I had to make a single choice, and this is one of those choices, I think none of us want to be in the single choice, The single choice I would looking at private sector to better understand what is it that's going to take growth, what is it going to take to make jobs, what is it going to do to bring people back to Ukraine and to give them, their children, their parents, the life that they all deserve and want. So that means we talk about labor. 70% of firms indicate that the shortage of labor is the number one issue constraint for them, even above security. And we already know that the labor constraints that are in place. So therefore, I would put it towards labor. And so how do you spend money on labor? Number one is I think you need to create that environment that supports people to return so that they are going to be part of the future of Ukraine. That means housing. 14% of the housing stock has been destroyed. With the World Bank Group, the IFC, MIGA, the World Bank, we have a very strong housing program looking at both housing finance, where there's a need. Less than 1% have mortgage is based on mortgages. So that's very, very small. The housing finance sector is being reformed, working with Ministry of Economy, with NBU, so working on housing finance and making sure that there's housing available for those who cannot afford to enter into the market, the social assistance. Looking at energy tariffs. People are going to need to be able to afford to live. They have to be able to pay their energy bills. And so with all the energy that's been destroyed, making sure that energy at a reasonable tariff level is available. Also looking at education, especially both vocational and other education and early childhood. We already know that there is a very low workforce participation by women, and there's a need to bring women in, and they want to go into the workforce. Early childhood education is going to be, among many other issues, very critical to them. And then the last two items we would say when we talk about innovation is to really build on the technology, the IT sector that is very strong in Ukraine. And so whether we looking at using that as how you generate growth, but also from a skills perspective and making sure people are trained in that. And then finally, and I think most importantly, is looking at veterans. The number one issue is going to make sure that veterans are able to have jobs that fulfill themselves, fulfill their families' hopes and dreams. Thank you.
Thanks. This is the first question, though don't be so strict with people that they don't answer my question, because I asked for 1 billion. And as far as I remember from the World Bank damage assessment, $84 billion needed for housing, So the question would be also 1 billion. So in this, where would you do this? But this will come back there. Thanks a lot. You really did a great job. Pierre.
Yes, so thank you very much. So I would start by saying first, and it's not only for the record, that it would be good to have these priorities acknowledged by Ukrainians, and that would be the first element, even if it's coming from donor money or international financial institution. The priorities should be set by the Ukrainian government with a clear vision of priorities, and that would help, I think, the sustainability of the priorities which will be defined. Is that there is these priorities are considered at the heart of the economic and social strategy of the country. The second one would be very much aligned with what Bob said, is that I would put focus on the social and human capital. That covers quite a lot of different elements. That covers health, obviously, and mental health is a priority. We've been devoting quite a lot of our resources, but more should be done. Education, vocational training of every child in Ukraine should be offered the possibility to follow offline education. Women should be offered also more opportunities in the access of different jobs, and reskilling is key there. I would focus also on obviously a limited number of sectors where Ukraine can find its place in the world value chains. And that covers digital, obviously agriculture and defense. And maybe not having 20 sectors where efforts are focused is important. And innovation is probably a cross-cutting, by the way, when I mention these sectors, is a cross-cutting element in defense, in digital, in agriculture. And that will create, I think, a capacity to attract, not only to mobilize domestic savings and domestic capital, but international one, and that will come back to the question of the involvement of private sector. We'll probably discuss in the rest of the conversation.
Thanks, Pierre. We will have a response from the Ukrainian side immediately on that, because I fully agree with you on that. Davide.
Okay. Good morning to everybody. First of all, I want to say that it's difficult to talk about reconstruction at the moment with the very cruel images of Kiev last night. But let's say that this will give us a renovated motivation. My straightforward answer to your question is that we need to invest in people. We need to invest in their capacity to rebuild, to innovate their country, and no title could be more appropriate than the title of this initiative, Innovation Days. As you know, we hosted the Ukrainian Recovery Conference in Rome in July. This is a big responsibility. We don't know under which scenario the conference will take place, either a cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire, or the present situation. In the first case, we can start the reconstruction. In the second case, of course, we'll be doing what we are doing at the moment, which is mostly early recovery. We see two things coming out on top of the agenda. The first one is the participation of business and the quality participation of business in terms of investment and contracts, but I will say maybe something later about it. The second one is the human dimension, human capital, the discourse around the diaspora and the refugees. We know that these are key elements for the recovery of Ukraine. We know the demographic situation. The companies lament the lack of manpower. We need to rebuild the social fabric. We are aware of the initiative from the Ukrainian government of building Unity Hub in our countries to promote the return of refugees. Of course, these initiatives have to be aligned with the rules on international temporary protection. So this is to say that we need a positive agenda. That means that we need, coming back to your question, we need to invest in rebuilding civilian social infrastructure, exactly what Pierre said. We need to rebuild modern, sustainable cities, and we need to rebuild it under the logic of building back better, which is a logic of innovation. I was yesterday in a panel at CSI on critical raw materials, and I must say I like very much what somebody said, that the most important critical materials in this case is cement, that this is what we need to invest in if we want to rebuild Ukrainian cities in a sustainable way.
Thanks, Governor, Minister. So we hear now that from our three international partners, investing people and therefore infrastructure which is needed for people, including housing first and the cities, and including also the space for kids, because we need also to engage more women, to job, and women and parents should be feeling comfortable that their kids are in both secure schools but also at schools. And the second is the private sector, and which is also important to drive. Do you agree with that? Where would you invest $1 billion which would come from partners? Governor.
Дякую, Влада. По-перше, хочу сказати, що дуже приємно бути сьогодні тут і бачити багато знайомих облич. Деякі навіть вже видаються рідними.
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to say that it's a pleasure to be familiar faces, and sometimes I think that we are kind of family members.
Багато хто з тут присутніх цієї ночі жив фактично на два міста. Серце було у Києві, а фактична присутність у Вашингтоні.
And many of the people present here actually spent last night in two places at the same time. Physically we were in Washington, but our hearts were in Kyiv.
Коли ми говоримо про пріоритети, то мені видається, сьогоднішня ніч їх дуже чітко продемонструвала. Немає іншого пріоритету, як оборона, це база.
When we are talking about the priorities, it seems to me that last night was a very clear evidence and good demonstration. There is no priority other than defense. This is the foundation.
Це те, що допоможе вберегти людський капітал.
This is something that will help save human capital.
Це те, навколо чого можна вибудовувати будь-яку ефективну стратегію економічного відновлення.
This is around what we can build any efficient strategy of economic recovery.
Якщо говорити про конкретні речі і пріоритети, то якби в мене була можливість на будівлі Національного банку написати щось одне, що свідчило про мої пріоритети, я б написав три слова: продуктивність, продуктивність, продуктивність.
If we talk about priorities, and efficiency, if I could write three words on the building of the National Bank of Ukraine, these words would be productivity, productivity, productivity.
Україна втратила третину ВВП. Вона поступово відновлюється. Наші міжнародні партнери надають нам колосальні ресурси, які в першу чергу йдуть на фінансування тієї потреби, яку формує війна. Український бізнес демонструє унікальну адаптивність. Але чи достатньо цього?
Ukraine lost 1/3 of its GDP due to the war, and our international partners help us to recover, and Ukrainian economy is recovering. But, whether it is enough, that's the question.
Дозвольте мені бути максимально конкретним в цих речах. Якщо розкласти на складові цю продуктивність, я би виділив щонайменше три елементи.
Let me be more specific. If we split this productivity into three parts, I would actually have these three elements.
Розбудова експортно орієнтованих напрямків, розбудова логістики, тому що внаслідок війни логістична інфраструктура суттєво втратила, і нам необхідно максимально підтримувати цей напрямок заради того, щоб в Україну надходила валюта і будували стійкі моделі партнерства, в першу чергу торгівельну.
First and foremost, building of export areas and development of logistics, because Ukraine lost a lot of its logistics routes and export suffers from this. So first and foremost, we need to recover this area.
Відновлення і реконструкція. Україна зазнала колосальних втрат від обстрілів. Українська енергетика щонайменше витримали дві хвилі таргетованих атак. Спочатку на енергетичну транспортну інфраструктуру, а потім на саму генерацію. Нам потрібно відновлювати наші виробничі потужності. І не лише в енергетиці.
Recovery and reconstruction. Ukrainian energy sector suffered at least two massive attacks. First was on the electricity grid. Second was on electricity generation capacity. So we have to recover not only, by the way, energy sector.
Третій напрямок – це автоматизація. В Україні дуже складний ринок праці внаслідок мобілізації, внаслідок демографії, внаслідок того, що з часів Другої світової війни війна в Україні спричинила найбільший міграційний потік.
And the third area would be automation. Ukraine now faces the challenges of a very tense labor market due to demographic issues, due to intensive migration flow Ukraine has never seen since World War II.
Але за будь-яких умов фундамент наших пріоритетів для використання тих ресурсів, які можуть бути доступні Україні, це оборона і обороноздатність. І це може бути ще однією дуже важливою, потрібною складовою для нашого відновлення, адже Європейському Союзу також потрібно думати про власну безпеку.
But the foundation for all the above priorities is defense. And defense sector per se can become an important element of economic recovery because European Union countries also have to mind their defense needs.
І Україна може і повинна стати партнером. А Національний банк України працює над тим, щоб в основі цього лежав стійкий макрофінансовий фундамент.
And Ukraine may and should become a reliable partner to the European countries, and the National Bank of Ukraine takes care of the stable foundation and financial stability for that.
Thanks, Governor. Sergei?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be invited here for this discussion. Important guests here, all well aware about situation in Ukraine, and I just want to admit what governors said minutes earlier, that for us is the most critical element of our reconstruction, and even dreams about reconstruction is security. And you know quite well the latest night, it's a testimony that without security it's probably all our efforts to restore our internal capacity is just can be questioned. That's why we understand it, and Ukrainian government try to find a way how to secure our own way and to provide our own military with necessary equipment, ammunition. Right now our capacity is around 30%. So we are able to provide our army with 30% they needed using our own resources, and probably it's a good and necessary way which help us to be secure. Of course, we depend on support from our partners on very natural elements which we are not capable to produce right now. It takes some time to develop it. Probably when we are talking about air defense system, when we are talking about long-range missiles, but we understand that it's a matter of years for us to be able to produce necessary weapons by ourselves. But again, if to be back for reconstruction and different thoughts about what our priority. I admit that all of the speakers describe very clearly our priorities. It's not, I can't provide any new information for you. But if we try to systematize it and to understand what can bring Ukraine's reconstruction in a faster pace than it is right now, I would think on our capacity to absorb money for reconstruction, because institutional capacity in Ukraine now oriented more on different other priorities. Security, among budget expenditures, we clearly understand that social protections, education, healthcare is necessary. But if you're talking about projects and ability to provide necessary capacities to prepare a project documentation, to do necessary procurement, it's probably the point of weakness which I would like we to strengthen. And right now we already done several steps. We implemented public investment management structure with single project pipeline, with DREAM as a key element of this structure. I mean DREAM is a web tool which provide necessary data, necessary information for all participants, local authorities, central government, investors, multi-development banks. They can all find here themselves. But again, it's not enough, because I think the key element of our productive capacities is ability to provide and to produce necessary projects, documentations, and made in a very fast and speedy manner.
I want to continue where you just stopped, Minister, and maybe starting with Bob. The situation is the following. So really, the government and together with partners did a lot during the last years, to finance, especially the budgetary finances, and also did a lot to build a proper institutional process, as you just explained, including PIM, DREAM, single project pipeline, strategic investment council, etc. We discussed this during the recent meeting in Kiev of the Ukrainian Donors Platform, and Deputy Prime Minister Kuleba was even showing a big poster with a process which is becoming already too bureaucratic even there. So we discussed now priorities. Priorities are there, and Pierre, as you see, they are very aligned. Why there is no money for reconstruction much? Where they should come, and what is missing? Bob, what is missing in the reconstruction architecture that factually, for budget we have, for military we had, but not enough. But for reconstruction, the flow of money is not so fast, I would say. Yes, we know about the war is ongoing, but Minister said there is also need to be investment in the capacity building for the projects. So what elements are missing still in reconstruction architecture in order to make more money, faster money, and more proper spending money?
Thank you. It's always a privilege to follow up on the minister's points because he's always correct and spot on. So I will support what the minister is saying in that regard. I think when we're looking at financing for reconstruction, I would look in two areas. Firstly, I would look to private sector, and secondly on external assistance. But firstly, private sector. And when we look at private sector and households right now, household consumption is 64% of GDP, investment is only 17%. Clearly, if we want the funds available for reconstruction, that 17% needs to rise up. And so I think whether it's the work we're doing overall with private sector, IFC, MIGA, the World Bank, part of the World Bank Group, has significant support there. What we do know is that it can happen. One of the programs that we support it's called ARISE, which is our agriculture support to small and medium-sized farmers and their enterprises, has raised over $3 billion of private capital, which has been mobilized. In the World Bank Group, it is the largest private capital mobilization in the entire world. And that's happened in Ukraine with small-scale farmers and their enterprises, creating jobs, creating investments, creating the future economic growth for Ukraine. So that's one part of the private sector story. I think the other element of the private sector story is looking at the financial sector. I think non-performing loans are around 30% of banking assets. That's not helpful because that's tying up assets that could be otherwise redirected towards reinvestment. At the same time, the banks have around, I think it's like 800 billion hryvnia, around $20 billion on short-term deposits with the central bank, with the national bank. So how can these be used? And there's very delicate policy issues as to how do you free up that financing to be available for financing for reconstruction without creating all other issues, which why we have the minister and the governor here who will very ably handle those issues as they have been. But the reality is looking there to that private sector. And then finally, when we talk about external assistance, yes, there's been incredible levels of external assistance, especially for budget support in the $40 billion a year, including this year and going forward, that need arises. I think as we look forward into reconstruction, the question is how do we make sure that those euros, those dollars, those foreign currencies are used for productive purposes, not on consumption, and so that whether those are being used to bring in equipment that's necessary for reconstruction or any other productive assets around that, to make sure that that foreign aid, that those foreign balances are being used for reconstruction.
And maybe if I may just immediately follow up question, and I will ask the same question to each panelist. What you personally and what World Bank is committed to do in the next 12 months in order to increase financing for Ukraine? I will ask everyone.
Absolutely. The World Bank Group has mobilized $77 billion since the full-scale invasion by Russia. and we continue to be committed. Our presence in Kyiv, between the IFC and the World Bank, we have an office of around 40 people living in Kyiv, and that is continuing to expand over the summer. That is the number one commitment we have. Number two is that we continue to work with our shareholders. We have guarantees for IBRD lending, which is our primary lending instrument. We have guarantees that support that. We have the Ukraine Recovery, Reconstruction, and Relief Trust Fund that has raised over $2 billion, of which over $1.9 billion has been committed and is being dispersed and achieving results. We are working with the European Union on also guarantees for our lending that we're able to leverage. And all of this then also leveraging on the private sector side. The IFC has brought in over $2 billion into the private sector, and that money and the future risks that they will be working through, we are definitely there for the long run with Ukraine. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks for a huge support World Bank shows to Ukraine, really, and with all the institutions. Minister, all partners say that also money will go not only to the budget, not only to the public sector, also to private sector, but also PPP projects, etc. But still going back to budget, you're the Minister of Finance. How to better use the budget in the public funds for reconstruction? How do you see it? And what you personally and what Minister of Finance is going to do in order to increase more funding for reconstruction?
We're traditionally struggling with other line ministries. It's our natural environment. So we try to preserve existing funds in our accounts, not to provide any cents or hryvnias for any needs. Of course, the key element which gives us such a policy tools is we want all money for reconstruction to be under control, to be transparently used, and accountable. All participants should be accountable and understand that this money has specific nature. It's not money which we got from our taxes. It's not money which we got from our domestic borrowings. It's money which we receive from our partners in different forms. Either it's loans for our multi-development banks. We have only 4, probably 5 big development banks which can provide specific loans for our reconstruction. And the all procedures which related to loans, it's quite painful if you want to implement this project in a fast manner. And it's good to find a right compromise between all procedures which our development banks wants to us to accept, as well as our internal desire to implement these projects as fast as we can. That's why my position is simple. We would like to our line ministries which involved in reconstruction be more able and capable to deal with money which is available right now, because this money is available, and it's a question that they should prepare all the internal procedures, streamline their team efforts into dealing with banks which now trying to help them. Again, it's not an easy process. Nobody wants this process to be complicated as well. So it's a question of creating internal capacity. And I would like to avoid situation, to be honest with you, when we'll have some money which is not related to specific procedures, because it creates some kind of problems when we try to use this money. Then we try to understand if this project or prepared in a proper manner. Do we need to adjust our initial calculations? And it creates a lot of cyclical problem. And when we realize that we implement something without all necessary procedures, it will be a good question why we did it. Probably last year it was necessary. This year it could be quite a question. Is it the cost of this project is so huge that we can question the general idea of this. That's why my position is quite simple. Money is available. We should find a way how to help Ukrainian government to be able to use all this money. The good examples is Poland. Poland is a champion of how to use money which is available. I don't know how, but they can convince their European colleagues that they need more money.
And they spend anyway.
Yes, of course. And for us, it's a good example of what we should do. So we should find a way how to deal with our European colleagues. And Pierre is laughing, you know what I mean. How to accommodate them for us to speed up this process.
Yeah, so we already came with, and the first question was the capacity in the government, the capacity of developing projects, capacity to absorb, the funding which the minister says available is an important topic. But still, 524 billion still in the papers of World Bank. Governor, there is an increasing number of talks about using the Russian assets for reconstruction. Do you see this possible? And if so, what you are going to do in order to make it happen?
Перед тим, ви знаєте, я хочу сказати, що варто було приїхати у Вашингтон, хоча б заради того, щоб почути від міністра фінансів України те, що я почув зараз.
To be honest, it was worth to come to Washington to hear from the Minister of Finance what I've just heard.
Це щиро робить мене, як голову Національного банку, щасливим.
It makes me, the governor of the central bank,
А це свідчить
happy.
про те, що ми з Міністерством фінансів і з урядом на одній сторінці, і сьогодні в столиці, та, власне, як і минулого разу, і позаминулого разу, представляємо тут українську позицію як спільна команда.
And it also means that we are on the same page with the government, and this time, same as previous twice, we represent our common Ukrainian position here.
Позиція, яку озвучив міністр, повністю відповідає баченню Національного банку. Ефективність і прозорість в використанні кожної копійки, кожного центу.
Presented by the minister is fully in line with the position of the central bank, of the National Bank of Ukraine, efficiency and transparency in spending of each penny.
І підзвітність.
And accountability.
Між міжнародними партнерами, перед українським суспільством, перед міжнародними партнерами.
Before the Ukrainian society and before our international partners.
І перед власним сумлінням.
And your own consciousness.
Якщо говорити про знерухомлені активи, це дуже важливе питання, і ми намагаємося зробити так, щоб воно постійно було на столі.
The issue of immobilized assets is a very important issue, and we try to keep it on the table all the time.
І це, ви знаєте, дуже яскраве свідчення того, що протягом цієї війни ми декілька разів вже проходили дуже складний шлях від неможливо до давайте зробимо це якомога швидше і майже негайно.
And this is also an evidence of the route we have passed so many times during this war, from no, this is impossible to okay, let's do it and let's do it immediately.
Отак і з питанням з нерухомленими активами. Спочатку цей кейс лежав десь так, знаєте, обабіч на краю стола, і ми поступово кожного разу, коли заходимо в кімнату, посуваємо його ближче, і він вже зараз десь так по центру.
And same story with the immobilized assets. I remember the time when this issue was somewhere at the very edge of the table, and each time when we discuss it, we move it slightly towards the center, and this time it's very close to the center already.
Я думаю, що ні в когось тут присутніх немає, насправді, сумнівів, що Росія не погодиться на репарації. І це означає, що знерухомлені активи – це є реальне джерело покриття збитків, які завдані Україні, які насправді навіть не в повному обсязі покривають збитки за швидкою оцінкою, про яку говорив Боб.
I don't think there are any people here who would doubt that Russia would never ever agree to pay reparations, which means that the immobilized Russian assets is a reliable source to cover the losses, and it's not even enough to cover the losses according to the first estimate mentioned by Bob.
Чи є реальний механізм отримати доступ до цих активів, як до джерела, яке буде доступне Україні для компенсації збитків і підживлення стійкості? Відповідь проста – так.
Is there a mechanism to get access to these assets, to turn them into the source, to cover the losses and damages of Ukraine and to fuel its resilience? The answer is very simple, yes.
І перший крок на цьому шляху – це усвідомлення того, що розмова про ризики, які несе ця конфіскація, якісь глобальні, ще якісь страшні речі. Це те, що намагається Росія максимально підживлювати і підтримувати цю дискусію. Але як тільки ми починаємо дивитися на скрупульозний економічний юридичний аналіз, ми одразу бачимо модальність, яка дає можливість Україні отримати доступ до цих активів, і справедливість повинна бути відновлена.
First and foremost, we have to realize that all the talks about risks and threats related to a seizure of the Russian assets are fueled by Russia itself. And when we do the economic analysis, we immediately can see the modalities that would allow to seize the assets. And this would be a fair and just step.
От і вчора під час зустрічі в Міністерстві фінансів Сполучених Штатів наша українська команда і прем'єр-міністр намагались цю папку посунути ближче до центру.
During yesterday's meeting at the U.S. Treasury, our Ukrainian team tried to move this folder closer and closer to the center.
І завтра під час зустрічі в МВФ ми будемо намагатися це робити. І кожен день, я переконаний, ми пройдемо цей шлях, і знерухомлені активи будуть доступні Україні. Тому що інакше бути не може.
We will do the same at tomorrow's meeting with the IMF, and each and every time we will make efforts. And eventually, I am convinced we will get access to the immobilized Russian assets, because it can't be in a different way.
Thanks, Governor. I'm also sure in that as well. Pierre, you mentioned, that when we spoke about the needs and the priorities, the housing, you mentioned cities. You did an impressive job with a French business, the French government to support Ukraine. So what kind of advice would you give to other countries where maybe a little bit behind sometimes, how to bring the private capital from the other countries to Ukrainian reconstruction? Let's imagine you build a city. Yeah.
So French people are always criticized being sometimes arrogant and knowing it all. So I like, by the way, some American friends. So I will refrain from giving any advice to our friends and partners. But first, I think it is about quality and not only quantity. And what Sergii and Andriy mentioned is very reassuring on this alignment, that quality matters, the fact that words are less important than impact and action is at the core of the strategic priorities of the Ukrainian government. So I would say first that. Second, that so procedures, processes, discipline, everything Sergii likes, we like it. And I think it's very important to have a sustainable path for development of Ukraine. And not only talking about numbers and additional funds, which we are doing the job and which we will continue to do the job, but also these aspects are very important. Quality is very important, and narrative are very important, linked to vision. And I think, in a way, cities are at the crossroads of a vision you want to deploy on a territory, and capacity to bring together public money, private money, on something which is convincing people who live or will live in a city. I was 2 or 3 weeks ago in Chernobyl, so went to Vlad, you convinced me to interest me to Slavutic. Maybe it's not, I know if the future model of what should be a Ukrainian city in 5 or 10 years' time, but it was based on a certain vision. Like, by the way, the mayor of Mariupol was in Le Havre in France, which have been 100% destroyed during the Second World War. Now we have feedback of 80 years after a visionary reconstruction of a city, where some inhabitants were unhappy, some are very excited, and this perception evolved over time. So it shows that also thinking about, how we can do this reconstruction in a European spirit, which means more or less building back better is not only a concept, but a concept which means less pollution, capacity to better combine professional and private dimension of citizens' lives, capacity to live in a better environment according to the highest standard, is the way we should think about that. And architects are very important people in that. I think I will go to Venice, for example, in 2 weeks' time at the Biennale of Architecture, where the French pavilion will only be on Ukraine, by the way. It will be about architecture in a country at war, and which has to be rebuilt. And I think it shouldn't be only a question of businessmen, of people who know about how money should be spent, but also about people who know how to combine that and meet more or less the needs of private citizens and private businesses.
You didn't want to give advice, but you did very elegantly, at least two advices which I heard. First, come to Ukraine, and not only to Kyiv. Is everybody happy to see governor and minister and talk to them for sure, but you need to go to Chernigiv, you need to go to Slavutich, you need to go to Kharkiv, you need to go to other cities, to Voznesensk, you need to Mykolaiv. This is what you need to do, because I agree with you that reconstruction is there. And Davide, your companies already work in Ukraine as well. You have One Works, which works with, I think, Danish government in Mykolaiv. You help, to rebuild my city, and thanks for that, Odessa. You took some patronage. So, what you advice can you give? And you recently organized an excellent and very well attended conference in Milan, where a lot of the private sector was there. It was oversubscribed, that you said in Kyiv. So, what your advice could be if Pierre doesn't want to give the advice?
Thank you very much, Vlad. I will not enter in this beginning of argument here for diplomacy's sake, but you mentioned Chernobyl, and I remember I was in Chernobyl when we put the sarcophagus under the nuclear plant, and that was the result of a very beautiful, extraordinary cooperation at the G7 level, with all the partners working together on that. Thank you very much for mentioning the projects that we are carrying out in Mykolaiv, in Odessa, where we are engaged in with a very systemic approach. The central government, the local authorities, universities, including the Carabinieri, are working on the protection of Ukrainian cultural heritage, and of course architects. Architects are very important. There will be many architects in the Ukraine Recovery Conference. There will be a session dedicated to the reconstruction of sustainable cities. In terms of business, as I said, the participation of business is extremely important. We are trying to enlarge their participation, to bring business not only from the United States or from Europe, but also from Asia, from the Gulf countries, from South America. We want to have an extensive participation. In order to do that, we need to take care of preoccupations from business. We have in the Ukraine donor platform set up a business advisory council. We need really to pay attention to their worries. One of these, the first important of these, is the end of conflict, of course, to have real security guarantees in order to be able to invest. The second one, where the European Union and Ukraine are engaged, is the reform process. We need to have a very solid business environment, and I must say we had a very impressive delivery of reforms over the years from the Ukrainian government, not only in terms of legislations, but also in terms of actual decisions, in terms of implementations, and these reforms will bring Ukraine into the single market so that this will provide a regulatory framework, which is very important for whoever wants to invest, also in terms of critical material agreement, in terms of investment fund. The European Union integration process will provide a regulatory framework, so this will be a win-win situation, and we will grant through the accession process the accountability, the transparency, the efficiencies of this what we do. We need financial instruments, of course. We need insurances. We need, for example, there is the need of an equity fund which will be able to mobilize private capitals for investment in Ukraine. We are working on it with Pierre, with the Ukrainian government, with our development banks under the second pillar facility provided by the European Commission, and this could be a very good deliverable for the conference. And finally, from the Italian point of view, we are working on a number of instruments. One of these is the G2G. We want to put together a number of tools that we are already using. There is such which has a platform of 1.5 billion for ensuring investment and export operation for reconstruction process, where Italian companies can participate. We also to emphasize our expertise in public private partnership. We have a lot of experience of working with in the sector of municipal utilities, and this is something we are going to discuss in Verona in the last preparatory event of the conference on 12th of May.
Thanks, Davide. And you said about you don't want to take diplomacy, but Pierre said about Biennale, which is in Italy. The Biennale now is curated by Carlo Ratti, who is who is a famous professor in MIT, who is doing the American. So this is and the French pavilion will be dedicated to Ukraine. I think this is exactly the mixture, this receipt which we need to, to make Ukraine, thriving also in terms of reconstruction. This is a kind of combination, and I'm absolutely agree with you that the European Union should play here as an important role, and it does, including through different instruments. Governor, both Bob and Davide now said about the financial instruments. From your perspective, in speaking about reconstruction architecture, is banking sector ready for reconstruction? Is insurance market ready for reconstruction? Leasing companies, capital market, and what is missing there?
Дякую, Влади, за це запитання. Воно дає можливість дійсно дати коротку характеристику поточного стану тих секторів, які готові максимально співпрацювати з приватним сектором.
Thank you, Vlad, for this question, because it allows me to give the brief overview of the sectors that are ready to cooperate with private capital.
Банківський сектор прибутковий, гарно капіталізований і ліквідний.
The banking sector is profitable, well capitalized and liquid.
Процентний спред на рівні 7%. Рентабельність капіталу 30%. Це фактично історичні максимуми.
Interest spread is around 7% and capital about 30%, so it's a historical maximum.
За обсягами надходжень до державного бюджету фінансовий сектор, банківський і страховий сьогодні займають друге місце.
In terms of deductions, contributions to the state budget, financial sector, banking and insurance sector are on the second position.
Ми розуміємо причину, ми розуміємо природу цієї прибутковості, але разом з тим ми бачимо, що банківський сектор вже вдруге сплачує 50% податку на прибуток і залишається стійким.
We understand the reasons behind this, we understand the nature of this profitability, but for the second year in a row, the banking sector pays 50% of windfall tax and remains profitable.
Це екстраординарні, виключні речі.
These are extraordinary, I would say exceptional things.
Але це свідчення того, що банки чекають, в тому числі партнерства і інвесторів, які, я переконаний, можуть зацікавитися перспективами роботи в Україні.
but they evidence that banks are waiting for prospects for investors who might be interested in operating in Ukraine.
Нещодавно було ухвалено закон про приватизацію державних банків, який розширює опціональність цієї взаємодії між урядом як власником і відповідними інвесторами.
Recently, the law on privatization of state-owned banks was adopted, and it expands the options for the government to cooperate with private investors.
Страховий ринок пройшов опрозорення. Зараз відбувається консолідація.
The insurance market was made more transparent and now is being consolidated.
В усі сфери фінансового ринку, банківський, страховий, небанківських фінансових установ, платіжний ринок, активно імплементується європейське законодавство.
In all areas of financial sector, banking, insurance, non-bank financial institutions, payment institutions, now being actively implementing the EU regulations.
Останні рішення Національного банку дозволили вийти на рівень еквівалентності 75%.
The latest review actually of the National Bank made that we exceeded actually and reached the level of EU legislation equivalence of 75%.
І це попри війну.
And this is all despite the war.
Це свідчить, що ми на жоден день не знімали з порядку денного питання наближення наших ключових секторів і нашої зони відповідальності до європейського ринку.
And it means that not for any second we stopped the alignment of our key sectors with the EU regulations.
І ми будемо робити так, щоб ця динаміка зберігалась. Ми дуже амбітні в цих питаннях.
And we will do our best to maintain this dynamics because we are very ambitious in this respect.
Thanks, Governor. I remember, more than 10 years ago when I joined the central bank, and we put in terms of our vision of the National Bank that we want to become one day a member of the family of the European Central Bank. So now with 75%, I think when you go to 80, Madame Lagarde should start thinking how to look as a daughter to Ukraine as well. The Ukrainian National Bank. Maybe we will just try already to wrap up with just few questions to you. Still, Bob, you speak also with. For IFC, for others, and you are in Kiev speaking with the private sector. What else they tell you, the private sector, what they need for, in order to participate in reconstruction in Ukraine?
Thank you. So you've already heard me once. What do they need? Labor, absolutely.
Labor.
And I think, and I will repeat that, just because labor is number one on this. Number two, and we've heard from the governor and the minister, security. Clearly, security is a critical element of this. Having said that, though, what we do know is that firms that are in Ukraine, remained in Ukraine, are by and large doing well. And I think we need to always to recognize that. And so that's an important element to remember. I think moving beyond that, then we look at the issues around everything that we look at from a policy perspective, looking at policy reforms that increase competitiveness, that increase some of the transparency issues. We're working to support government on issues around war risk insurance, around some of the other issues related to foreclosures. There's a whole, around financial sector, there's a whole agenda that Ukraine started a number of years ago, that they are continuing, and that they will continue. And it's around those reforms that I think are going to make a very large difference so that firms are able to recognize the competitiveness. They are able to look at this as part of the European Union and the criticality of that. And finally, I'm going to end up where I started, if you want a short answer, is back to labor. And all the social issues, the support to veterans, the support to others, to make sure that labor is in place.
Yeah.
That's the short answer.
Human capital is really, I agree with you, is a big asset of Ukraine and should be further invested there. Davide, we have now only 1 hour to discuss the reconstruction and financing, and also as a part of the innovation path for Ukraine. But you will have the full conference in Rome, and I know it's a big event, and you plan a lot. How are you planning to address those questions which we now just briefed there?
First of all, we believe that the main goal of the Ukrainian Recovery Conference is to raise awareness and mobilize the investment and support for Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. So financing reconstruction will be one of the main themes of the conference. We should aim at unlocking funds for recovery and reconstruction. We hope to see a lot of deliverables on the side. We are doing a lot of preparatory work with partners, with IFIs, in all the 4 dimensions. So we are going to discuss financing in the business dimension. There is a first panel on financial instruments and risking. In the local dimension, for example, we are going to discuss access to finance at sub-national level. In the Recovery Forum, are workshops based on priority sector for reconstruction. There is going to be discussions on the instruments that business can use to participate in this. So we hope to see a strong involvement of partners, IFIs, development banks in this regard. As I said, it is very important to address business preoccupations. And of course, the conference should look also a bit beyond what we are doing. Should look at the roadmap after Rome, and this roadmap, I think, will be given by the enlargement process. We hope to see an acceleration of the enlargement process. We hope to see all the clusters for negotiations open by the end of the year. We count very much on the contribution of the Polish and the Danish presidency, and we think that we really need to accelerate. And very final point, the conference will be also an opportunity to look a bit at the architecture for reconstruction. What we've done here with Sergii, with Pierre in the Ukraine donor platform is fine, but this is something which is working for the early recovery stage. So we need to think, once we have a ceasefire, what we are going to do, not only in the next 90 days, but in the next 2 years, whether we want to see more. I have here next to me the governor and the minister for finance, but what is the trade-off, for example, between grants and loans, and how we will set up rebuilding Ukraine altogether.
Thanks, Davide. You have a big agenda. Good luck with that. And also, I know how many people work on that, and therefore I really hope to do that. So we heard now, and we'll just wrap up, that it really needed a lot of investments in human capital and labor, because labor is a shortage. We know that security, as the governor and the minister said, the security is an important element. We had a joke one day with governor that the best instrument for monetary policy is a good air defense system. And for sure, Pierre said about that reconstruction is actually local on the city level, and therefore was advice for him. You remember his advice, to go to the cities, not only come into Kyiv, go a little bit deeper in the country. See, it's a beautiful country, and David does, give advice also on the using Biennale, to go to French pavilion there. You will see Ukraine, but actually to use the platforms. And for sure, we need to think about the post-war reconstruction architecture, absolutely, and that architecture is not only for 90 days, but even we need to plan it, but we need to go further. Minister, the final word from you. What would be your advice to people before Rome conference, but also beyond, as David now said?
Thank you very much, Vlad. We met several times with Davide. We discussed about possible outcomes of and our expectations related to Ukraine's recovery conference. But what I would like, we're constantly talking about some kind of business participation in reconstruction of Ukraine. And, during these 3 years, I constantly listen to this dialogue between different participants, people looking forward and just trying to understand how to bring this forward, because it's interest of Ukraine, probably it's interest of our partners, it's also interest of multi-development organizations. And right now it's still debates, it's still debates, and we would like to have very clear cases when business invests in Ukraine, and specifically new business, because the biggest investors in Ukraine right now is a business which already present in Ukraine. Of course, they have some needs to do this, but again, if I may, my advice could be find a way to nurture possibility to invest in Ukraine in sectors which is in a potential, which has a potential for development. Specifically, we are talking about high technological military industries. We are talking about potential of processing agrarian food. We are talking about development other technologies in Ukraine, because, well, it's probably that sectors which worthwhile to look at and invest. Because if we just try to go around the bush and just blaming somebody why we are not investing in Ukraine. So please find a way to visit Ukraine, probably not only Kyiv but other cities, and find good spots for your investments. Welcome.
And the last word from you. Once I thought to write an article about which we name Faces of Reconstruction. These are the faces of Ukrainian reconstruction. Let's make another applaud for them.